So, hi, I'm with Dr. David Daniel from James Madison University. And David came to Springfield College actually in the fall of 2019 and gave a talk that looked at how what we often give to students for an educational experience isn't what students really need. We give them things that don't actually sort of nourish the academic appetite, as it were, in ways that would really benefit them. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Um, but what David talked about really sort of inspired some of our faculty to reconsider some of the things they do. I had lots of conversations with faculty afterwards about it. And I wanted to bring David in and just talk for a few minutes about this shift that's happened as we have gone from face-to-face instruction at a small residential college like Springfield College to remote instruction. And I just wanted to get David's thoughts on a few things about this shift and how we can continue to engage in really effective pedagogical practices, but how we need to think about that. So David, thanks for being here. And as I said, I just wanted to get your thoughts on the shift from face-to-face to remote instruction and what sorts of things you've seen happen, what sorts of things you'd like to see happen, either at your institution or other institutions.
Well, one way would say is to say I was fortunate, but I have been fortunate in that I've been helping a lot of faculty make this transition. Faculty who never thought about it, who were hostile to the idea, or just didn't have the skills developed to move their classes. I've also been working with people who think they're designing for teachers and students when they're designing for the medium, not necessarily the impact. So I've been in between those two groups all the time. And one thing that I really want to stress is if you're a teacher, you're much more than someone who delivers content to people. You're actually someone who structures, motivates, scaffolds, keeps people in line, makes real-time adjustments. And some of those things are really hard to do when you're asynchronous and online, right? So it's a different skill set. For me, I figured out very, very quickly, I hadn't taken the time to build an online class. Online classes are very, very different. They make different assumptions about the learner, and they make super different assumptions about the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to keep me in the class. I wanted to keep my students in the class. So I took a different strategy than a lot of people were recommending. I tried to migrate my face-to-face class to a different medium, not design a class for that medium.
It's a really important distinction. I like the way you draw that out because, as I said, with a residential campus, the students come to a campus for an experience and the instructor. Now, that's not to say online instruction is not a good method of instruction, but it's not for the students that you and I tend to interact with. Our students want humans, they want that interaction, and they want to be engaged in ways that are different than the way online students are engaged. It's kind of a different medium. So I like that you draw that distinction out. I also really appreciate the notion of how an online course requires a different sort of skill set than most faculty have, because faculty don't go through that kind of training very often.
Well, it's also not something we tend to want to do.
Yeah.
Right? We want to rock. It's like a writer versus a stand-up comic. You could be funny in both mediums, but they're very, very different skill sets, very different kinds of timing, kinds of setup, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Right?
So thinking about that, what sorts of things have you done to continue to keep yourself in the classroom while you're doing this remote instruction?
Well, the first thing I did was not make a whole lot of radical changes. I tried to keep it very consistent with what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing I did was I didn't share any of my stress about what was going on. The students were very, very stressed. A whole bunch of things were going on. There was a lot of drama coming from other teachers who were sharing their stress in different ways, being kind of random with what they were doing. So I tried to project calm. I tried to think of things through before I announced them to my students. I have lots of students. My small class is 300 people. So I created a student advisory board whose job was to interact with me as I was developing things or give me feedback on how things looked when they were front facing back out to the students, make sure that I was communicating with them in a way that was productive. I tried to think about some of the challenges students might have, for example, structuring their time. A class schedule structures your time. Right. So does a party schedule for that matter. But schedule structure your time, and now you're going back to no structure, and that can be challenging for a lot of people. So, for example, my lectures, and I did start recording lectures, and they will be burned if that's possible. They will definitely be erased, but I think I'll actually burn the hard drive too. But I did that. I try to make them as much like the real classroom presentation as possible. I didn't narrate my slides. I didn't take all that time people want to do. By the way, the feedback from my students is they kind of appreciated the way it was coming through more authentic, less refined, more context.
Mm-hmm.
People who are narrating PowerPoint slides tend to be very formal,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and so it works for me.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is they knew me for half a semester,
Uh-huh.
right? So I can continue that class culture. Where
Yeah.
there's an online class where they didn't, it would be a very different culture. I would be designing for students who were very, very different. So given that we had a relationship, they knew what to expect, I knew what to expect. I was able to take those norms that we had developed, those expectations, and just follow through with them, which in my online, and I do teach online, could
Mm-hmm.
never do in an online class.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point about they know you, because like you, I believe that my ability to interact with my students in the informal way I interact with them in class was really one of the things that helped me develop rapport and really to pull more work from my students, more effort and more learning from my students,
Yeah.
because I have this ability to relate to them and to be informal. So when I recorded videos of any kind of lecture, and just recently I did a video for them on psychological disorders. In class, that might be 2 classes. I was able to do a lot of my informal conversation in about 15 minutes because I didn't have students talking back to me, but that was the beginning of conversations that happened afterwards. And I did it very informally. I was in probably a Springfield College t-shirt. I stood in front of my camera and just talked. And then that led to the sessions that followed where we had conversations about points in what I discussed with what they read and what they did for their assignments, which essentially they had to go find videos on some of those things and then comment on how the videos might have represented or misrepresented things they read or heard. And it was a nice sort of dynamic with my class. And you're right, I could do that because I had 8 or 10 weeks or however many weeks we had of
Right.
building up the rapport with my students. So I think that's an interesting thing. And it leads me into my next question. We're all hoping that we don't have this world in the fall, yet the reality is there's a good chance we might. What do you recommend for faculty if they do have to remain remote with new students coming in the fall?
All right. So that really actually changes a couple of the variables, because the models out there that a lot of colleges like yours and mine are using are, maybe we start off online, then we move to in person.
Yeah,
Maybe we start off in person and we have to get kicked off online if things get too much. So we have to be super flexible.
yeah.
We also can't make the fatal mistake that I think a lot of online classes make, that our students are motivated learners.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, like in my online classes, I have to make certain accommodations because students literally wait till last minute to do things.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to give deadlines and structure that very carefully so that they can't fall into that trap. That's why in this class, my lectures are only up for 24 hours. So if you miss class, you miss your notes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving you 24 hours because you may have a different schedule. You may go back home to other sorts of things. And that structure is actually rated pretty positively after the first week.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Right. So I think what we need to do is design something that feels homey, welcoming, that isn't too antiseptic,
Mm-hmm.
but take some of the best practices that we know from online. I wouldn't say teaching, online learning, online presentation, and build those into it. So a hybrid model that doesn't make it so essential that the teacher be right there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So more clarity about when you read, make sure you pay attention to this. It's just like when you're watching a chat show online, but what they say is, here's a clip. Tell me what's on your clip. Then they show you the clip.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I do that in person. I didn't think about doing that online, but that little preview actually helps structure what they're going to be doing,
Yeah,
because they don't have the background knowledge and I can't see their faces to say, okay, they don't know where we're going with this. I better do that.
yeah, and it's a great point. I've been talking to faculty about when you are in class giving instructions on an assignment, you can explain it, and if a student has a question, you can answer it. But if you type up that assignment and send it out, if students have questions, they might take time to respond with, I don't know what you mean, but it's not the same thing. So I've been encouraging faculty to not only type it, but to record a very short verbal description so students have two different ways to get access to it. It's not perfect, but at least gives a little bit of redundancy and maybe a different perspective so students can see it from different ways. It's what you're saying. It allows for that flexibility and the nimbleness that students and faculty need in that kind of environment. So
Yeah, and one of the things a lot of professors and students, believe it or not, don't like is their picture on a medium like this.
oh yeah,
I don't like my picture. I have a mirror at home. I see it every day. It's not good.
yeah,
But we have to get over some of those things.
yeah,
I don't lecture the same way online because that's called evidence,
yeah,
right? I don't have that interaction. I don't. So we have to understand that it's very difficult to talk to a camera, even like this.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and it's very, very difficult to replicate what you do in a live with watch Conan O'Brien actually any night you want. He's doing a really, really good job uh, in this medium, and it's not the same.
yeah.
You act differently, so you have to adjust to this. I'd practice, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
and just don't be shy. Don't you know if they're gonna if they would see you in real life, do that, and also don't listen to experts all the time. A teacher, a good teacher, and I don't know you, right? I know you, Chris, and you're a good teacher. A good teacher has expertise about teaching, not about how to structure information. That's a part of teaching. It's not all of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all these things out there, quality matters, all these things. Those are recommendations for structure, for content, those sorts of things. But the fact of the matter is you probably know how to teach your stuff better than a technician.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The technician has a place. You say, here's what I want to accomplish. Here's how I want to accomplish. And they see, okay, given the medium that we're working on, here's some strategies you can use to get there. But don't abandon what you know is important for you to be a good teacher. Don't leave your secret sauce. Otherwise, this stuff becomes super homogenous and the impact gets lower. And keep in mind, what I mean by impact isn't just passing the test.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of other sorts of things people get from a good teacher. And those things, some of those things are built out of the system automatically online unless you purposely build them into it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So given I have a high touch style in person I have a TA room that's open 20-25 hours a week. I have WebEx, your equivalent of Zoom, open 3-4 hours a day. They can pop in. I have special sessions. I never give my lectures on it, but I'll have special sessions with 125 people will show up.
Mm-hmm.
Just for just for things.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a lot, but that's only a third.
Yeah,
Right?
I know.
So it sounds like a lot, but that matches my style, right? If you're in an online class, having open office hours may not work the same way for people who don't know you, right? So you have to figure out what works for you, and you can't do that in 1 semester or 2 semesters of designing. Everything's iterative, everything's developmental, right? The most important thing is that you don't abandon what you think is important for them to learn and your ability to make that happen. You figure out how to make that happen in a different medium.
So one of the things that I wanted to chat with you a little bit about was some issues that came up when we discussed the shift to remote learning with students. And some of the students made some comments about workload and about the changing instructional strategies. I want to just sort of get your feel on what you think about all of that.
All right. Well, first off, students complaining about workload,
I know, right?
right? So, um, I have developed sort of an immunity for that. So we have to decide what of that is feedback versus frustration, right? So let's think about that. What I saw here with a bunch of teachers is they thought they were losing 3 hours a week in front of the students, or they didn't know what to do with some of the assignments, or they were worried about security of exams or those sorts of things, right? So we had a bunch of teachers that added a whole bunch of assignments, just a whole bunch of assignments, many more that was on the original syllabus.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I didn't, in terms of my ethic, I didn't want to add more to the syllabus. Okay. On the other hand, I had 3 hours to compensate for.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to think about that. The students weren't expecting these assignments. They're stressed out too. So you have to be very parsimonious about what you're doing. Too much work doesn't mean better learning, right? So again, what are your goals? What were you doing with those 3 hours? If you were taking those 3 hours, for example, you're in a survey class, lower division general survey class, you're probably clarifying original content, primary content, clarifying the book, adding to the book, things like that. If that's what you were doing during those 3 hours, that's what you should be assigning them for those 3 hours. Not a bunch of assignments where they have to interact with the material, because your goal for your class was to clarify it before they can interact with it. Now, hopefully you had assignments to interact with it, or you had discussions after that. But the first thing is, you can't have a good discussion unless there's been some sort of content mastery to a certain level, right?
Yeah.
So were those assignments really based on your model for compensating for the loss of the face-to-face, or just, I need to give them more assignments so it's more like college, or whatever? Or, we tend to think more sometimes is better. And learning, that's hardly ever the case.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I think that, we heard a little bit about that here as students got more assignments, but I think to a point you brought up earlier, there's, in my mind, this notion of being flexible and adaptable, but in large measure, it's listening to students' voices in a context and never losing sight of what your goals are for the course and what your goals are as a teacher. And I think that what ends up happening is you listen to one voice or another. So I've had faculty say, well, students are bitching about this, that's just a mistake, or students are happy with this, so this works. But typically the truth lies in between all of that, and you need to be really thoughtful and introspective about your teaching, and really never lose sight of students meeting those learning objectives that you believe are important for the course, and trying to work towards those in ways that make sense. And that makes sense piece is tough, because you got to really be able to step outside of yourself a little bit and think about what makes sense.
And that's your expertise. Okay, the teacher has that expertise, or should. A good teacher does.
Mm-hmm.
We have to rely on our own expertise for this. The students are looking to us and paying us for
Mm-hmm.
our expertise, not just for a bunch of stuff that will get them a degree at some point.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if they think they do. Imagine you went to a preschool and you listen. And actually, I want to get into this with you a little bit. Listening to students doesn't mean doing what they say.
That's exactly
right? So, for example, if I go to a preschool and I say, "Hey, what does everybody want for lunch?" and every day it's going to be ice cream,
Mm-hmm.
right? If I let it come from the students, it's going to be something that's bad for them,
Mm-hmm.
but it's something that makes them feel good.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give them peas, but they won't eat the peas. I'm giving to them, they won't eat the peas, right? So I'm listening to them by saying, your peas don't taste good. It doesn't mean I should give you ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
It means I need to figure out a different way to give you your nutrition.
Yep.
So when a student comes up to you and says, and starts saying, I want this, don't do this, I want this, right? What they're saying is the thing you gave me makes me uncomfortable, which may be fine, may not be doable, which may not be fine, or may not tie to the learning outcomes well, and they don't see any reason for it, right? My job is to make the peas maybe taste like ice cream, but never to ever take the peas out of it. So
Mm-hmm.
these assignments need to be nutritious.
Yeah. And I think that you said something really, really important to college students. It also helps for them to have an understanding of why they're doing these things, why they're eating the peas.
Especially when you're online, because they can't just raise their hand really quick and ask.
Yeah.
Or that's what I said earlier. Here's, set up the clip, set up your learning. Here's why we're doing this. This is, here's what you're going to get from this if you do it well. You also need to give them more chances for feedback.
Yeah.
Right. Because they then need to know if they did it well. They maybe can't gauge that on their own. So feedback is super important when I went online. And it's also important for me as a teacher. I really want to stress this. One of the biggest mistakes a lot of the teachers that I was working with made was trying out new technology in the moment, rather than trying it before the moment. Right. So if you want to use Zoom, if you want to use WebCT, if you want to use, that's all WebEx.
Wow.
I said WebCT. I'm sorry, I'm old. But if you want to use a course management system for the first time, if you want to use Zoom for the first time, or for something different, for example, you can take Zoom and you can put your PowerPoint slides on it, and they say you in the bottom, and you've got basically a screencast lecture, right? There's a whole bunch of things you can do, but try it before you go live.
Yep.
Right? It's going to be new to them too, which means they're going to have to use some cognitive resources trying to make sense of the new thing. And it won't be effective if you're not confident, you don't know how to work it. That's why I put the student advisory group together.
Mhm.
Right? I would say, hey, can you hop on for 10 minutes? I want to see how this works. How
Yeah.
does it work? That gives me feedback, but don't do the new technology for the first time with your class, no matter how forgiving and awesome they are.
Mhm.
This is just like good science. Pilot, pilot, pilot.
Yeah, I had a faculty member who wanted to use the Respondus lockdown browser, which I don't think is something that a lot of people use because their courses don't require it, but the sciences, some of them.
But really quick. So Respondus Lockdown Browser is something a lot of people went to for security, right?
Yes.
And I have data on this. Students don't think they're cheating when they use two devices.
Yeah, I
So,
understand
so
what you're.
you lock it down, and they just look on their other device.
I
Secondly, it doesn't work with Chromebooks,
Yeah.
which some of our students might be using Chromebooks. They're the cheapest computer out there,
Mhm.
so that's also have an accessibility issue.
Yeah.
Respondus Lockdown Browser assumes there's someone watching.
Yes. Well, and in fact, the respondents that we have, they have the web camera enabled so they can watch too.
Who watches?
They create thumbnail sketches, and the faculty members can go back and look at them. But
Nice.
but the point is this: the faculty member wanted to use it because of accreditation purposes. They need to have monitored exams.
Right.
So I suggested, and she did it, and I thought it was great. Is she gave a 5-question, no credit quiz to a lab group to try it out and work out the bugs before she launched it live,
Brilliant.
just to make sure she had the bugs worked out. She found out the Chromebook example and was able to help the student come up with an alternative way of doing it. So she mitigated all of those things you're talking about, doing something that is exactly what you're saying. You pilot it, you find out, okay, this is what I need to do. Okay, I'll work around it and make it work. And so she had no problems. She gave her first exam to 60 students, had 0 issues with the 60 students because she had piloted it first.
Good rule of thumb for all teaching. Every new idea is a hypothesis until it works. It's not pedagogy until it works. You got to prove it works before you make it contagious.
David, that's great. I really appreciate your comments, and thanks for coming on today.
Oh, anytime.
Yeah.